Um, My name is Jakub Godziniński. I'm a research professor here at NUPI, working mostly on Russian foreign security policy and on Russian energy. And I'm happy to see so many of you to join us today for this interesting seminar. We have the pleasure of having Georg Zachmann from Bruegel Institute with us, and he's going to give us some insights into the very interesting and important topic of the impact the current crisis in Ukraine has already had and is going to have on the state of energy relations between Russia and the European Union. We know that Russia is the most important external supplier of energy to Europe, that Ukraine has been until recently the key country for transit of Russian gas to Europe, and we all know that the crisis developing in Ukraine since the end of 2013 has already had and is going to have a huge impact. And I would also like to use this opportunity to thank Georg for coming and joining us, and hope very much that we will have a very interesting discussion. He is going to speak for approximately 30-40 minutes, and then we will have a possibility to ask him most difficult questions. I am convinced that he's well prepared to address all those questions. He has been involved quite recently in a number of very interesting projects, played a crucial part, for instance, in preparing Bruegel's analysis of how Europe could cope without Russian gas that was published online approximately 1 year ago by Bruegel. And I think that this introduction will be a very good starting point for your presentation, and the floor is yours, and we will have, as I say, as I have already said, some time to questions and answers after his presentation. Thank you very much, and please.
Thank you, Jakub.
Thanks a lot for the invitation to Norway, and I'm very pleased to present you some of our recent work. The policy contribution is on our website, so if you like to read a bit more about what I'm going to present, you can find all what we are doing freely available there. Bruegel is a think tank in Brussels. It's dealing with economic issues from the Eurozone crisis to international trade arrangements, and also on the area of energy. I hoped to have a very calm year last year, also for family reasons. I prepared for not having a lot to do there, but then a lot of things happened that were completely unexpected. On the one hand, the European Union embarked on thinking about a new 2030 strategy, but all this was trumped by the developments in Ukraine that had significant repercussions on how European energy policy is going to be determined. And Europe still has not recovered from this shock. Europe is still looking for the way it wants to go about energy security, about the future of its energy system. And the current publications on Energy Union that we have seen 2 weeks ago are rather telling about all the uncertainties that are still around in which direction Europe is willing to go. So will we see a much more federal approach with European member states buying gas jointly together and having a single energy market with a single supervisory organization, or will we have member states taking care of their security of supply and making sure that they are having good contracts with the individual suppliers? Germany with Russia, maybe France with Algeria. So all this is still not yet determined, and the paper that we have that I want to present today is somewhat lining out some options with respect to the situation in Ukraine and Russia, and it's making rather strong recommendations that I would like to discuss with you. So what I want to do is essentially describe the objectives and instruments that both Russia, Ukraine, and the European Union have in terms of natural gas trade. And from this then to see what essentially the different scenarios are and which role the European Union can play into pushing either a better or a worse scenario. To give a bit of context, in terms of natural gas, as Jakob said, Russia is the most important source of imports of natural gas. Europe is got in 2013 about 130 billion cubic meters of natural gas from Russia, and this gas is essentially flowing through three different lines. First is through the Nord Stream pipeline, which has a capacity of 55 billion cubic meters per year, and where you can see that the usage of the line has significantly increased from 2013 to 2014, so it almost doubled. Then there is the line through Belarus, which is a smaller line, the Yamal line, which has 31.5 billion cubic meters. There have been discussions about extending this pipeline, but so far it's not yet done. And it always has been fully used because the Russians essentially own this pipeline now. And then there is the third and largest capacity which is available of bringing gas to the European Union, which is through Ukraine. The overall capacity is somewhat in the region of 160 billion cubic meter, and essentially the increase in volume in Nord Stream, which is controlled by Russia, is mirrored by a decrease in the usage of the Ukraine pipeline. But overall, what you can see is that Russia is still more dependent on exports to the European Union. In terms of natural gas exports to the European Union are about 15% of Russian export volumes. And the other part that you see here is very often gas exports to countries in the Commonwealth of Independent States, which essentially pay prices that are below market prices. For example, Belarus pays something like $150 per 1,000 cubic meter, while Poland pays something in the order of $420 per 1,000 cubic meters. Then the second message is that the Ukrainian gas transit system cannot be entirely circumvented. About 60% of this 130 billion cubic meter that come from Russia to the European Union have to go through Ukraine, as long as there are no new pipelines being built. And the third message is Europe is dependent on Russian gas, but if you look very deeply into it, there might be ways to get those 130 billion cubic meters, at least in the medium term, from other sources. You all have heard of the discussions on natural gas deal, or the so-called winter package between Russia, Ukraine, and the European Union. There was a big question inside the European Union whether Russia will still deliver gas to Ukraine during the winter. And the link question for the European Union was, if the Russians don't deliver any more gas to Ukraine, then Ukraine might not be able to do its transit obligations anymore, and Europe would be in the cold during the winter. Now, these disputes have been fought until the very last moment, and an agreement has been found only in November, if I remember correctly. And the agreement shows essentially two things in terms of price and debt, which is kind of the numbers that you see here. There has been a compromise that is rather in favor of the Ukrainian side. So the price is somewhere in the middle between the Russian expectations and the Ukrainian expectations. And the debt that Ukraine has to settle is essentially what Ukraine acknowledged in terms of debt, and pending the last amount of debt that Ukraine might have to pay in the future, if the Stockholm Court of Arbitration agrees that Ukraine will have to pay the additional $2 billion, then Ukraine will have to pay it. In all other things, there has been no settlement, and those are the big points that Ukraine essentially opened the discussion for. Ukraine wanted to use those negotiations in order to ensure that the gas contract that has been concluded in 2009 is essentially revised, because this old 2009 gas contract forced Ukraine to buy a huge amount of gas at a very, very high price. We are speaking about more gas imports than Ukraine consumes, even so Ukraine produces gas on its own. And Ukraine was committed through this 2009 contract to continue buying these large volumes every year and was not allowed to resell them to other markets. So this contract was clearly unsustainable for the Ukrainian side. And this at a price that was also clearly unsustainable. Before the oil price came down, the oil indexed gas price was on the order of $500 per 1,000 cubic meter, compared to 420 for Poland, as I said earlier. So Ukraine was forced to buy larger volumes than it needed at prices that are much higher than what its neighbors are paying. And therefore, Ukraine wanted to get rid of this contract and wanted to use the negotiations to manage that. But the European Union feared that not reaching an agreement will put its own security of supply in peril. Ukraine was dependent on the European Union for getting gas in reverse flow mode. So therefore, Brussels put a lot of pressure on Ukraine to sign anything. So the result is that essentially the important long-term items have not been solved in the favor of Ukraine. The short-term items, a solution has been found, and we are essentially heading for exactly the same situation this year again, because we are now start negotiating the next summer and then the next winter package again, and I expect that the results will be not much different. So let's open a bit the larger picture on the different actors. What are the objectives and instruments that we see? First, Russia has really economic objectives. As every country that is exporting something, Norway is exporting oil and gas. It has economic objectives, and it's pretty plausible that Russia wants to ensure sustainable high gas exports, so a lot of volumes at a price as high as possible, because that's making the country richer. And the Russian side is using essentially three policies to make this happen. The first one, and that's a very critical one from a European perspective, is market segmentation. Gazprom tries to separate the European market into different sub-markets. You see high prices in the Baltics, high prices in Poland. You see much lower prices in countries where Gazprom has no monopoly. For example, in the UK market, Gazprom is selling at significantly lower prices. In the German market, where there's competition from Norwegian and Dutch gas, Gazprom is willing to accept much lower prices than it's accepting in other markets. That's acceptable as a company strategy. The problem is Gazprom is really trying to lock in this ability to segment markets by buying assets. So, for example, in terms of pipeline systems, they had an asset swap with Wintershall try to have an asset swap with Wintershall to get hands on the parts of the German gas system, and they are trying to buy storages. They are trying to secure capacity in long-term contracts for the different pipelines in order to make sure that only they can use those pipelines, so that nobody else can do the arbitrage in sense of buying cheap gas in the German market and bringing it to Poland and sell it there, and therefore equalizing the price on the European market, because that would destroy Gazprom's ability to essentially price discriminate between the countries. And this ability to price discriminate is really valuable for Gazprom's profit. And as any company, Gazprom has also all sorts of lobbying opportunities that they are having, and that's certainly not unexpected, and each European company would do the same. Then the second strategy is trying to lock in the dominant role of Gazprom and preventing newcomers to enter the market. A classic example is the Lithuanian LNG plant, where Lithuania said, okay, we are paying $500 per 1,000 cubic meter of gas. That's too much for us. We are building an LNG plant, and then we are getting natural gas cheaper. Then the Russians said, okay, if you don't build it, we give you 450 or a significantly lower price. So it's kind of this sort of predatory pricing to avoid infrastructure that reduce the dependency from Gazprom. And again, I think commercial companies would do potentially the same if they are faced with the threat, but it's certainly not in the interest of the countries to let such things happen. And the third thing that is very important is, as we have seen before, there are several transit countries, Belarus, Ukraine, and those countries are very important for Russian exports to the European Union, and those countries are aware of their position, so therefore they have been trying to negotiate very, very hard about getting a part of the gas rent. Essentially, Russia producing gas very cheaply, selling it very expensive in the European Union. There's an economic rent to be made between the cheap production price of maybe $50 and the expensive sale price of maybe $400. And now the question is, how do you negotiate with the transit country about who gets this 350 euros? And now the transit countries and Russia have negotiated very hard, but then Gazprom says, okay, if we build our own pipelines, then maybe we reduce the market power of the transit countries and we can keep a higher share of the profits to ourselves. So that's the picture I already spoke about in terms of gas price differentiation. So Lithuania 480 versus Germany 366 is a pretty clear picture, taking into account that the gas fields are somewhere here. So it's much cheaper to bring the gas to Lithuania than it is to Germany. So this has nothing to do with the economic cost of bringing the gas there, but it's just an economic market segmentation strategy that has worked rather well in the past. A part of the economic objectives, there are also political objectives of the Russian side. One important thing that the Russians have been using in the past is using gas price discounts for buying political favors in its neighborhood. As I said, Belarus is receiving very low gas prices, and the low gas prices, for example, motivated Belarus to join in Eurasian Customs Union, which is the big project of Putin in order to recreate some sort of Soviet Union 2.0, as somebody called it. And the gas price discounts are an important carrot that the Russian side can bring forward on a rather ad hoc basis, because it can be withdrawn from one day to another, as we have seen, for example, with the gas price discount for Ukraine and Yanukovych. Yanukovych got a gas price discount by about $200 when he agreed not to sign the association agreement with the European Union. After the Maidan revolution, the entire discount was cancelled after the end of the quarter. So it shows how gas prices are essentially used in a political way. But this only works if you manage to maintain a non-efficient and opaque and politicized gas sector, both in Russia and in the neighborhood. Because if you have a very transparent, open system, the Norwegian government cannot easily go out there and say, I grant Germany a lower gas price than the Netherlands because I like Germany better. So for that, you need to have hands on your sector in a very government interventionist way. It requires you to be able to discriminate between customers, because otherwise you cannot be sure that they just sell the gas elsewhere. An important thing for the Russian side is also to reduce its own dependence on exports, because we have seen in the past also discussions about sanctions, to which degree European Union might be able to sanction Russia by not buying gas anymore from them, and or to which degree Russia might use its gas leverage over European member states. But then the question was, isn't this hurting Russia more than it's hurting the European Union? And since this discussion arose, we have seen the discussions about building new pipelines to Turkey to export more there, new pipelines to China. There are two big projects there, and Russia is obviously taking a very high commitment in those projects. The capital cost, especially for the pipelines to China, are enormous, and the gas price that one can deduct from the contract is something like $350 per 1,000 cubic meter. So they are getting less money for much more investments than they need. It's presumable a purely political project and not an economic one. What is the leverages that Russia have in terms of gas? Well, the most obvious one is reducing or cutting off gas supplies, and Ukraine already has been cut off from Russian gas supplies already in April, no, in June. So no, or only very small amounts of gas have been brought to Ukraine since June. Even so, Ukraine used to buy I think 60% of its consumption from Russia, and also some Central and East European member states like Slovakia, Poland, Romania, and also Austria complained last year that Gazprom reduced the amount of gas flowing to it below the nominations of those countries, and there was an expectation that this is due to the fact that those countries are sending reverse flows to Ukraine, so kind of against the Russian gas of Ukraine, and therefore Russia tried to punish them for that. Obviously, we don't see any smoking gun for that, but it's a plausible hypothesis. Another means is harming the economic interests of countries by bypassing the gas transit or gas trade. So some European countries like Austria with the Baumgarten gas hub is strongly dependent on Russian gas. So the Baumgarten hub only makes sense if there is Russian gas there. The Slovakian pipeline system makes 300 million euros a year from gas transit. The Hungarians are very keen to get the gas through the South Stream system. Ukraine has typically made large profits from Russian gas transit. So threatening to reroute transit is another means for another leverage of Russian gas policy. Diversifying export markets is another leverage. So threatening Europe that that Russians don't export gas anymore. It's a bit more complex than that because essentially we are talking about different gas fields. The gas fields for the Chinese market are the Far East markets, Far East gas fields of Russia. The gas fields for the European markets are more the West Siberian fields. But we are talking about kind of competition in terms of finance. Russia has limited finance, and they can either put the money into the West Siberian developments or more into East Siberian developments. But that would be a threat for European security of supply in the longer term to some degree. Then Russia can threaten to increase gas prices. They have been doing that with respect to Ukraine. With respect to Europe, it works less well because we have seen in 2013, for example, Gazprom had to reduce prices significantly in order to become the biggest gas exporter to Europe again. Before Norway was the biggest gas exporter for 1 year, simply because Russian prices were too high. So there is an optimization on the Russian side to be made. And then there are not directly related deals, not directly gas-related deals. You might have heard of the Hungarian example where essentially Rosatom is financing and building a nuclear power plant for the Hungarian government. That's a project worth some $10 billion. So it's a large deal, and that makes it probably quite difficult for the Hungarian government to conduct any gas-related policies that are against the interest of Russia. What is Ukraine's role in this game? Ukraine has the typical objectives of a gas import country. So it wants to have low gas import prices. It wants to reduce its import dependency, and there are different things that Ukraine wants to do there as import diversification, to get more gas from the West, increase internal production. And you have to see that Ukraine's production potential is really large. Ukraine might become a gas exporter in the next 10 years if it really were to invest into its fields. It has a lot of offshore gas, it has shale gas, it has coal-backed methane, and it also has significant conventional fields that have not been invested into in the past 30 years. When essentially the Siberian developments in the Soviet Union started, all the investments in the Soviet Union went into those Siberian fields, and no more money was invested into the Ukrainian fields. Ukraine used to produce, I think, something in the order of 80 billion cubic meters. taking into account that current consumption in Ukraine is something like 45 billion cubic meters, it shows that Ukraine might, with proper investment, to become an exporter of gas at some stage. But for the time being, that's not in the card. And then the last point is energy efficiency. And here, due to the low prices of gas that are subsidized in Ukraine, energy efficiency is really horrible in Ukraine. Then the third objective of Ukraine is to maintain its key transit role and high revenues. So Ukraine has used its kind of monopoly on gas transit for getting huge rents from this transit system, several billion dollars every year. And certainly Ukraine does not like to see South Stream or Turk Stream or any other pipeline to come, because it would reduce the value of its pipeline system significantly. And the final objective is kind of getting rid of those interventions into the gas sector from the Russian side. So trying to develop gas sector domestically. The Ukrainian gas sector is a mess. There is all sorts of oligarchs playing into this field. The state-owned company Naftogaz is virtually bankrupt, and there is a lot to be done to make it efficient. Now with the International Monetary Fund, they have agreed to increase the gas tariffs for the population by a factor of almost 3, and that will go a long way. But there's a lot of more things to be done to make the gas sector efficient and effective. What's the leverage? Well, in the short term, Ukraine still can block gas transit. So there's still some gas from Russia that has to go through Ukraine. Otherwise, there will be some lack of supplies to Europe. But this is probably not lasting very long if either South Stream or Nord Stream 3 and 4 or Turk Stream or Yamal or other things are going to be built. Then Ukraine will not have any pivot role in the gas trade between the East and West anymore. But Ukraine also has interesting other assets, especially the gas storage in Ukraine are the largest gas storages in Europe, and kind of giving access to those, both the transit system and the storage system is valuable both for the European and for the Russian side, and using those collaboratively would be good for everybody. And then the Ukrainian gas market might be a very attractive thing for all sides, both for the production potential of Ukraine that I spoke about, but also in the short term as a consumer. Ukrainian gas consumption is still very, very large. It's significantly larger than that of Poland, for example. Just to reiterate the point that the importance of the gas transit system of Ukraine is going to decline. So it used to be some 10 billion cubic meters in 2009 and per month, and it's down now to less than or something like 5 billion cubic meter in August 2014. And with more pipelines to be built and continuing lower demand on the European side, this shows that the Ukrainian leverage is veering off. Now, does the EU has objectives, or does it only are there only member states objectives? That's a big question to be asked always when talking about the European Union. But I think there are some EU-wide objectives, because the EU as a whole is a gas import region, and almost all member states are. And what Europe essentially in its energy policy wants is low gas prices and secure supplies. And how it wants to get there is by increasing market integration and competition, so building the internal market that functions. But this has been in the cards for about 20 years, and the success of this can be disputed a bit. And in more kind of supply terms, the hope of the European Union is to reduce dependence on Russian gas in particular by diversifying of gas or energy sources and energy efficiency. So we have seen discussions about southern gas corridor projects that never really took off. We have discussions about the renewables turnaround that to some degree was motivated by increasing supplies of non-fossil fuels, and also by as a mean to put more competition in the energy sector vis-a-vis Russian supplies. But the challenge is really diverging interests of member states. Some countries can live very well with the current situation. Germany, as I said, is enjoying rather low prices because there's competition there. And if there were a joint European gas market, the gas price in Germany would potentially be higher than the current price. So this price discrimination is helping German consumers, and therefore it's not so easy to convince the German side of that a really functioning internal market is good. The same holds for companies. Some companies are really benefiting a lot from the current situation because they are having privileged access to Gazprom, and those companies are then lobbying their member states' countries to not hit too hard on Gazprom's ability to differentiate between different companies. In terms of transit and trade, as I said, EU Stream, so the Slovakian gas transit company, is probably very happy about the situation, that it still manages a very large share of the gas transit for the Russians, and would not like to see the Russian role diminished strongly. And then the European Union member states are also unsure on which gas market they essentially wish for. There are some member states that want a strongly interventionist gas market where they essentially can say who gets gas at which price. And just to give you one illustrative example, in France, gas, if it enters into the country, is made smell on the high pressure network for security reasons. In all other member states, gas is made smell at the low pressure network only, and therefore it's impossible to bring gas that is once it arrived in the French system into any other European country, which is essentially a mean to keep low gas prices in France. It's obviously only a regulatory issue, but it could be probably solved rather easily, but the political will seems not to be there for the last 20 years. Then on the last item, when talking about Russia and Ukraine, we cannot only talk about gas. We also have to keep in mind that there are some other issues ongoing, and here the assessment and the foreign policy preferences of the member states are strongly differing. We have heard the statements from Hungary, from Greece on the one side. We have seen the statements from the UK and Poland on the other side. So there is a different assessment of this conflict in the member states, and also on the role the different partners are playing here. So what could EU do? Well, in the short term, EU could essentially reject to buy Russian gas. We did some calculation last year to which Jakob alluded, and we said, well, in a very optimistic scenario, it could work. So we might have to switch off some consumers, but overall, it won't be Armageddon for the European Union, but it will be very tough for the Russians. But I think it's not a very realistic option, to be frank. In the longer term, enabling alternative supplies is certainly something that is very strong on the mind of European policymakers. They like the sort of maps that you have there and draw some nice lines, because it's this nice geopolitical games that you can play when you discuss with the Turkmens about the pipeline. And it's something that foreign policymakers, I think, are very keen to do. From a purely kind of economist background from which I am coming, I'm a bit more skeptical about that, because I'm not sure that those political projects are always the best projects, and in the end you might not get the economic investments anymore, because some foreign policymakers are building you the pipelines that you never wanted, but then you have them and then you use them, instead of letting the market develop those pipelines that are really the good ones. And the final tool is internal market and competition policy, and we have seen, for example, the European competition policy watchdog DG Competition opening an investigation against Gazprom. We are waiting for a ruling, and we will see whether that could help to reduce the ability of Gazprom to discriminate prices. One of the points in this investigation is essentially this price discrimination ability, this destination clauses, which say that Gazprom sends gas to Poland, and it has to stay in Poland, otherwise they are not getting a new contract with Gazprom anymore. And those are certainly not in line with the single market. And if DG Competition can prove that such clauses exist, that they might do something about those. So in summary, Russia has leverage in the short term in terms of stopping gas supplies and also buying into some member states. But those leverages quickly wear off, because if you want to stop gas supplies, then the European Union would find alternatives, and then the leverage doesn't exist anymore. The Ukrainian leverage in the whole picture is rather limited because Europe is so dependent on either Russian supplies or European reverse flows that I don't see that Ukraine can play a significant own role in that game. And for the European Union, I think in the medium to long term, the time is running in Europe's favor with the shale gas revolution in the US, with the much more liquefied natural gas markets that allows to ship gas from the Middle East or even from the US or from Trinidad to the European Union, and with significant import capacities in the European Union, the European Union might be able to survive without Russian gas and have a much better negotiation position with the Russian side. But it will require EU action to essentially reap those opportunities, because if the European Union just stays there and does nothing, then the current situation will continue to linger longer. So what are the three scenarios that we developed? Essentially, the EU split business as usual scenario, so it's kind of the default scenario. What we would expect to happen if nothing happens is that the EU member states continue their individual policies towards Russia. There's no joint European line. There is no prospect for Ukraine to join the EU energy. We don't want to provoke the Russian side, and the consequence in Ukraine will be dramatic. The Russian rules of the game will prevail. It will continue to stay import dependent. There will be no effective reform of the gas sector, because as soon as some policymaker says we are starting to do something here in Ukraine, then some oligarch might get some cheap gas from the Russian, and he will buy them with this money that he can make from selling it more expensive to the Ukrainian market into the political system. So there is a lot of things that can continue. So in the past, for example, Dmitry Firtash was able to buy gas from Russia for a significantly discounted price, sell it directly in Ukraine at a higher price, or produce fertilizer at discounted price and use this money for lobbying the Ukrainian political system in his favor. And he was a strong supporter of the Yanukovych government. So it's really these are examples. It's very difficult to prove some of them, but I think the general perception is that that part of this is what happened in the past years, holding back any reform attempt on the Ukrainian side. And if there's no reform of the gas sector, at some point, it's rather likely that Ukraine will seize some of the control over its gas transit system to Gazprom. We have seen how it worked in Belarus, and if gas is unable to pay its bills, and if the choice is to give kind of the long run ownership of the gas transit system in order to survive for one more year in the very short-termist situation Ukraine is currently in, I could well imagine that Ukraine goes for such a thing if no other help from the European Union is to be expected. But this would also then give Russia strong leverage beyond the gas sector. You have to see that the gas sector subsidies in 2013 represented about 6% of the GDP of Ukraine. So it's an important macroeconomic effect, and it's an important budget effect. So the debt of Naftogaz, the Ukrainian gas company, is about half of the Ukrainian state debt. So it's really significant. Overall, the consequences won't be so dramatic. So the EU fails to defend its own rules, but it often does. It limits the effectiveness of EU neighborhood policy, but this neighborhood policy hasn't been very effective in the past. Russia, with control over the gas pipeline system in Ukraine, would be much better able to manage its gas flows and bring the gas either to Romania or Poland, or to please any of them. So it might be easier for to play its games of market segmentation, but it won't be an essential shift over the current situation. And the energy union in this case would be essentially redundant, because will be some countries in the Balkans, but part of that, it's not the big foreign energy policy tool that it was envisaged to become. The second is the EU becomes united and unconditionally helpful. So it's simply helping Ukraine in the gas sector reforms. It's kind of putting pressure on Russia to settle the gas conflict with Ukraine. It's preventing any bypass by South or Turk Stream, essentially saying, no, we are not going to buy gas in Turkey or Greece. We want the gas to be transited through Ukraine. And it's guaranteeing all sorts of reverse flows from Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia to Ukraine in order to really strengthen Ukraine in its negotiations with Russia. But it's not really pushing for gas market reforms in Ukraine because it's so difficult. Well, the consequence for Ukraine would be Ukraine would avoid the difficult gas market reforms, the increase in prices, the fight against the oligarchs that are sitting in the gas sector. All this is political suicide to be conducted by the policymakers. If there's no pressure from the European side, they will not do it. They will continue to seek short-term benefits, and they might even manage to somehow get cheap European gas transferred into their own pockets. Things like that happened in the past, and so there might be possible private interest benefiting from EU support there. The consequence for the EU would be essentially the EU would be dependent on a non-transparent Ukraine gas transit, and it would be an unsustainable system. An expensive detour to get back to the first scenario after some time, because the member states and the population in the European Union would not be willing to support a corrupt Ukrainian gas transit system. And the third the EU defines how the whole picture should look like. So the EU says what it expects from Russia and the European Union, taking into account what the interests of those countries are, and tries to develop a system that is workable and beneficial for everybody. The European Union would have to redefine its relations with Russia. That means overcoming internal divergences. So Germany, Poland, Hungary, all member states should sit together and say that the short-term benefits of continuing the status quo are less valuable than the long-term of having a joint stance towards Russia, and to have a real functioning internal gas market. One should define shared strategic objectives and, what is very important, tangible solidarity rules, because it might well be that Gazprom does not like this shift in step, and therefore tries to play obstructive policies. And then Slovakia needs to be ensured that they get the gas from in case Russia does not deliver them anymore, because otherwise it's simply not politically sustainable for Slovakia to go on with such a mission. For this, the EU has to redefine also its gas policy. So the internal and competition rules need to be enforced, not only against Gazprom, but also internally against its own companies. Security of supply strategy should be very strong, should be European, about solidarity, as I said, but it should not be about we want not to import Russian gas anymore, because the European Union can get gas from Russia at a comparatively low price, and it should continue to do so. But the European Union should at any moment in time be sure that it can, from one moment to another, switch to other suppliers at slightly higher prices, but it needs to have this insurance in the pockets in order to be able to deal on equal footing with everybody that is there. And all those statements one hears in the press of we don't want to buy Russian gas anymore, I think that's not the solution. The solution is we all want to work together, but the European Union should be sure that in case something happens, we can for the next 3 years get the gas from other sources at slightly higher price, but we are not susceptible to blackmail. And then the EU should not only look on its EU gas market. The EU gas market is large, but the Ukrainian gas market, as I said, for example, is also significant. And having a large, unified kind of European gas market beyond the EU is very helpful to create really a very liquid marketplace where everybody wants to sell its gas to, simply because it's a very transparent pricing mechanism, and you know for the next years what price you will get if you destine your gas to the European market. And such a reformed market that extends beyond the EU borders would then also be efficient in enabling investments not only inside the EU but also outside the EU destined towards the European market, which would be interesting also for Norway, I presume. And if no cooperative approach from Russia, then, as I said, the EU should be prepared for a difficult time of transition. For the Ukrainian market, I think the EU has to help in order to make the reforms happen. The reforms won't happen out of themselves because they are politically too difficult to conduct. So, okay, it used to be 5 points. The 5 points I wanted to make is, first, there are some initial steps that Ukraine should really clearly commit to in this timeline, and some of this already has happened. So transparency of the Ukrainian system has significantly improved. We now know how much gas is flowing into the Ukrainian system and how much gas is flowing out of the system. We know how much gas is in the storages. So it took more than 20 years to make it happen, but now it is there, and that's very helpful for everybody to see to assess the risk of Ukrainian gas transit. Ukraine needs to cancel price subsidies, and there also Ukraine is willing to take a very, very strong and bold step, also with push from the IMF, so with the money from as a carrot. Ukraine seems to be willing to act here, and the monitoring of gas flows is also advancing. Still, there are steps to be made. Ukraine does not really have own gas metering stations on its Russian border. All the gas metering on the Russian borders happens on the Russian side. So it's not. In situations of conflict, there might be an issue of whether the Russian metering is really as accurate, or we simply don't know whether the Russians or Ukrainians would be lying if there's a problem, because the metering is not there on the Ukrainian side. And for all this technical assistance is very relevant. I spoke to the Ukrainian chairman of the regulator. He's a 24-year-old young guy. He's very keen on doing his job, but the whole regulatory authority is kind of frayed with civil servants from the Soviet Union time, and there are not so many people that are really capable of building up a fully transparent gas regulatory system there. EU member states and World Bank are trying to help there, but there is still a long way to go here. Then the second point is that Ukraine should kind of demonstrate to Russia that it is able to get gas from the West. We would suggest here that Ukraine does not buy the volumes, but it just buys an option. So in a sense, it says, okay, RWE would allow us to draw on 20 billion cubic meter of its own gas. The price for this gas would be rather high, but in case we don't get the gas from Russia, then we have this option in hand, and this should be priced by the market. So we might give Ukraine support through financial assistance, but the gas on the gas side, I would not go out of the realm of the market, because otherwise we might replace dependence on Russian gas price subsidies by dependence on European gas price subsidies, which is not a healthy thing to go for. The third point is deep restructuring of Ukraine's gas sector. As I mentioned, Naftogaz is still a very complex entity. It is one of the last remaining public assets that are available in Ukraine, and I think some oligarchs are queuing for taking a stronger role in that. So there is, for example, the gas production owned by Naftogaz, which is in the order, I think, 15 to 18 billion cubic meter, which is significant. So it's making, I think, some $5 billion per year. Then there is the gas transit that is also making several $billion per year. So privatizing this just right now is maybe not a solution, because then the wrong people might get it in uncompetitive tenders. But some reform there is certainly necessary to solve the issue there. One idea, for example, is on the pipeline system to split it off, Naftogaz, and privatize it. Well, not really privatize it, but sell it, for example, to a European public bank, like the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. The big advantage of such an approach would essentially be that the EBRD brings in money quickly, and the current price that you would get for such an asset is rather low, so therefore EBRD might a bit overpay. They would then come in with a management team, help to reform the gas transit system of Ukraine. Maybe they only buy 51%, and in 5-10 years time they privatize the whole thing, and the revenues go back into the hands of the Ukrainian state. That would be beneficial both for the European side, because gas transit is secured, might even be a good business case. It would give it would resolve the uncertainty issue about Ukraine policy, because a public bank from the European side would have a rather stronger influence on the Ukrainian policy system than would any private investor have. So we think that's something one might want to look a bit deeper into. And then the last point is some assistance in renegotiation of the 2009 gas contract, because as I said at the very beginning, that's not a sustainable contract. But renegotiating this gas contract right now and focusing only on this gas contract right now is the wrong way. It's not going to work, because as long as Ukraine has no alternatives to get gas, the outcome of the contract will be that of 2009 again, simply because Ukraine doesn't have the means to get the gas from any alternative. So I'll leave it at this, and I'm happy to discuss.
Thank you. Thank you, Georg, for guiding us through this difficult gas landscape. I think that with such a well-informed audience, we should expect some difficult questions to be asked. So I open the floor for questions, and we still have something like 35 minutes. So please feel free to ask questions. Please present yourself and be short.
Hello, my name is Julia Lu. I represent Fridtjof Nansens Institute, where I'm just starting a PhD about the Russian gas sector. I would like to thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I have a question for you about the position of Gazprom. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about how the situation in the company is perceived, both generally and by yourself, because my understanding is that it's been a very stable situation for a long time with the large and cheap supply, and it's been a stable market situation, and now there are many changes. So is there a sense of that this is something that the company is adapting to and able to adapt to, or is there kind of more a sense of a crisis? Thank you.
Okay, I'm probably not the most expert on the corporate environment inside Gazprom. What one can observe in the Russian gas policy is obviously a shift in thinking about the gas export monopoly, which is very important for Gazprom's revenues. So far, all pipeline exports from Russia, which are constituting a large of the value creation, are controlled solely by Gazprom. And there is now some discussion whether, for example, for the Asian fields, there might be other exporters. So Novatek and is one of the companies. I think when thinking about designing collaboration between the EU and Russia, one can think in three layers. The first layer is kind of what's optimal if you take the two together and don't care about the distribution. Then obviously there might be outcomes that might be not helpful for the Russian side, so it's therefore you might have a more really complex approach. Then the second layer is to say, okay, what's optimal for each side, and that's still very good for both sides, but it might still not work because either inside the EU and inside Russia there might be distributive effects that might preventing such solutions. And then the third layer is saying, okay, what's the players in the different countries and what their political influences, and then it's getting really, really tricky because you have to understand what political linkages Novatek has with the Kremlin, and what's Gazprom's role in the whole picture, and where essentially because we are talking about huge trends, as I said at the beginning. Take $50 production cost and take $400 sale cost and multiply it with 130 BCM. It's a huge amount of money that is somewhat distributed between Europe and the transit country and Russia, and then inside the country is distributed among different interest groups. And ignoring this picture is difficult, but looking into essentially money is distributed inside the Russian Federation is very, very tricky. Just remind you of the big role that Cyprus has as foreign direct investor into Ukraine and Russia, and it's certainly due to other reasons than pure economics.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Henrik Seip. I run a consultancy called Eastern Europe Group. Thank you very much for good insights. My interest is in Ukraine's energy independence policy. I attended an energy conference in Kiev last week, and the forecast from independent observers there was that with regard to Ukrainian natural gas consumption for this year, we can expect to see the market share of Russian gas decrease from around 30% last year to in the neighborhood of 12% this year. Most of that would be compensated by increased reverse flow. We are, of course, aware in this country that Statoil has entered into an agreement with Naftogaz, the volumes of which we don't know. And some of that would be compensated by a first fledgling energy efficiency improvement. You are right to point out that Ukraine is a disaster in this area, and there is an enormous upside. But my question is then, as you understand, about the viability of the Ukrainian energy independence policy. Do you think the numbers that I've mentioned as a prognosis for this year are realistic? And is it feasible for Ukraine to liberate itself completely over the next few years from its dependence on Russian gas? Thank you very much.
I don't have all the numbers on the back of my mind, but if I'm not mistaken, last year Ukraine only imported gas until June, and therefore the storage levels were quite significant at the end of June, more than in years before, and it was able then to survive now almost all of the winter without any additional Russian gas. So there have been 1 or 2 billion cubic meters bought due to the winter package, but that might not even have been really needed. But now storages at the end of winter will be empty, and question will be, will the reverse flows in domestic production be enough compared with the lower consumption? My feeling is it might be. We see increasing capacities from Slovakia in terms of reverse flow capacities. The question is, are the volumes there? Because we are not talking about Norwegian gas flowing through Germany and Slovakia into Ukraine. We are talking about Russian gas turning in circles at the Ukrainian border. There's kind of a carousel of gas established there with the pipeline, so that the Russians export their gas through Slovakia. In Slovakia, it's then European gas, and then it's sent back through another pipeline, and it's counted as imports into Ukraine. So what is a bit unsure is how strong is the pipeline system in the rest of Europe, whether it's really possible if the Russians cut off supplies to Slovakia to bring back enough gas to Ukraine. So that is, I think, a risk point. But a part of that, if Russia continues its deliveries to Slovakia, Poland, and Hungary, or to Western Europe, then I think it could be made happen that Ukraine is self-sufficient. We still have some industrial consumption that might be cut off. So, for example, fertilizer production is still, I think, a bit is still being produced, which has no huge implications for the population. But it will be sharp, so it's really like on the edge, so it's very difficult to without really in-depth analysis.
Ole Gunnar Westvik from NUPI. Thank you for a nice presentation. I wonder if you could comment somewhat on the LNG developments. It's growing very fast, building terminals everywhere. And I met with the Lithuanian energy minister a couple of weeks ago, and he was so happy that now he has bought Norwegian gas, the Norwegian ship terminal in Klaipeda, and he will be independent of Russian gas quite soon. And this is a possibility for many countries which have a sea line, and also Ukraine has a plan for LNG terminal near Odessa. So wouldn't this, for many of the countries, change the picture very much in terms of alternatives, competition, new suppliers?
I'm always about talking about individual alternatives, because the gas system and the European Union gas transmission system, and if you look into the LNG import capacity, European Union, it's I think 190 BCM per year, and it's completely underutilized. So it could essentially replace from one day to another the Russian gas. The problem is that the LNG terminals are in the wrong locations. They're in the UK and in Spain, and it's difficult to get all the gas out there to Central Eastern Europe. So maybe solutions is also more reverse flow capacity inside the European Union to be able to bring the gas, for example, through France, where I explained what some technical difficulties there are. So get it from Spain through France into Europe. And and other alternatives about reducing gas consumption, having interruptible contracts, having more storage. So I would not just point on one alternative as being the solution to this thing. I would more urge for a rather holistic, systemic approach, and to say where, with the lowest amount of money, we can ensure that we have alternatives available. I don't want Lithuania to buy LNG all over the time for 450 if they can get Russian gas for 400. Then they should buy Russian gas for 400, but they have the LNG terminal and an option contract with the Qataris so that they can get the gas as soon as Moscow doesn't like them anymore. And I think that's the way to go. We should think about having alternatives available, and those alternatives might be a high variable cost, low capital cost, and sometimes it's better to build an additional pipeline or have more storage or have an LNG terminal, but that remains to be calculated more on a systemic basis than just looking into individual projects.
Since I don't see any other questions, I can... okay, you have one additional one, okay?
Since there's nobody else.
I will also follow me.
I wonder how you assess the future of Gazprom. The company is hardly a gold mine and has been used for various purposes by the Putin government, both domestically and abroad. And we have seen several prophecies about Gazprom being doomed. Do you see it as a solid corporation with a good business future, or are they in deep difficulties?
I think the corporate governance of Gazprom is very known to be difficult. When one hears about pipeline projects that typically cost twice the price that corresponding projects cost for other companies. On the other hand, I think it's a political decision what happens to Gazprom. Gazprom is a political company to some degree. So if somebody decides that Gazprom should stay alive, it stays alive. And if somebody decides that no, we need the new kid in town is the one that we want to push, then it's the other one. But I don't. I'm not a criminologist, so I don't really see into those pictures. From purely economic point of view, I cannot answer your question.
If I may allow to ask a question myself, you have painted a picture of kind of three possible futures for European gas market. The one kind of modeling through the same situation as today, then the other one developing into something in between, and then a kind of positive scenario. And you have focused your presentation on the impact those scenarios can have on Ukraine and Russia. But there is also another kid on the block, Norway, that has also very high stakes in the European gas market. Could you share with us some of your thoughts about how those three scenarios could impact on Norway's position on the European gas market? I know also that in Norway there is a lot of debate about whether what is happening in Russian-European gas relations may have some very negative impact on the future of gas as a fuel in Europe in more general terms, and how this may also impact on the Norwegian position on the European gas market. So if you could elaborate a little bit on those issues.
Well, if you are going back to a very polarized gas sector in the European Union, I don't see how the rather commercial approach that the Norwegian gas policy is taking continue to work. So if it all gets into a political game, then probably also the counterpart has to become more and intergovernmental agreements and things like that, which might not be good for the efficiency of the Norwegian gas sector. But that would be just a first thought on this side. In addition, what we have observed in the past is that that gas demand in the European Union has been declining, even so everybody expected it to increase. And part of the reason for that is that low gas prices in the US shifted some industry there. Part of the reason is that the Union really drove out some gas consumption, but also part of the reason has been regulatory uncertainty and desire of the European Union to reduce its gas import dependency by not what I explained before, trying to have alternatives at hand, but by simply killing gas consumption. And if the last thing were the case, then it would be difficult for Norwegian gas exports. Maybe that is part of an answer.
More questions? You had a question, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Tom Johnson. I sat here and listened to you saying that Naftogaz makes a lot of money, billions, you said. But you also said that it has like 50% of the Ukrainian debt. So that doesn't really make sense to me without there being another story behind it. So I would like to, if you could shed some light on why that is.
It's rather simple to explain. In the past 20 years, gas prices in Ukraine and gas tariffs for the population used to be extremely low. Typically, they paid in the order of $50 per 1,000 cubic meter. And Naftogaz had to buy gas from Russia for about $400, so it changed over time, all those numbers, but just to give a rough indication. So they bought gas for $400 from Russia. They produced gas themselves. They sell essentially to their own supplier for $50. So they didn't make money off the massive gas production that they had. And then they sold some of the gas more expensively to domestic consumers. So there's kind of a multiple tier pricing system where they try to blend the domestically produced gas, which they paid very little money, together with the Russian gas, for which they paid a lot of money, and bring it to domestic consumers that typically paid little and some that paid a lot. But due to the different pricing structures, there was a lot of room also for getting rents for certain people out of the system, and overall it was always easier for the government to say, okay, we back the Naftogaz debt instead of starting to do something about the tariff structure. Now with the new government in Ukraine, it seems, and especially with the IMF arrangement, it seems as if Ukraine would be really willing to now go a big step in terms of resolving this gas subsidy issue. So one hears really about a price jump by 260%, 300% for final consumers. It will be a huge blow for the Ukrainian population, because the social system in Ukraine is virtually absent, and it was used as some sort of social policy to grant them low gas prices. On the other hand, the main beneficiaries from the low gas tariffs typically have been well-to-do households, because they consume more gas than the poor old babushka sitting in her one-room flat. The idea of World Bank, IMF, and now the Ukrainian government is we want to establish a social policy that is more targeted, increase the tariffs from to cost recovery level. Whether we will be there soon, I don't know. But until then, there's still the risk that that debt is accumulated within Naftogaz. Naftogaz has not invested a lot in gas production in the past, because if you only get $50 per 1,000 cubic meter that you produce, you're not thinking about increasing production, even if increasing production could be done at $100 per 1,000 cubic meters, or things like enhanced gas recovery. You put in some nitrogen in order to push out more gas. Might be extremely beneficial, but you prefer to buy for 400 from your Russian instead of paying your domestic producer 100 to get out more gas. So the whole picture is really deeply uneven and needs to be resolved, but it's both for social policy and kind of oligarchic policy reasons quite a difficult thing to do.
Another question.
Hello, my name is Christophe Fillon from the University of Leiden. Thank you for your illuminating presentation. I'm wondering whether the Ukraine membership in the energy community and its association agreement with the EU is going to contribute to helping the reform of its gas sector.
Well, I met the energy community 1-2 times, and I would see a really much stronger role for the energy community, and also the communication on the energy union that we saw 2 weeks ago highlighted again the role of energy community for the EU energy foreign policy. The energy community secretariat, even though there are just, I think, 3, 4, 5 people sitting there in Vienna, was massively involved in helping Ukraine to draft the new gas law, which is in line with European regulation. So Mr. Kopacz, the head of the energy community, is very often in Kiev and discussing with members of parliament and discussing with the ministry. So they are really doing a tough job, and I mentioned how important technical assistance is. Try to discuss a bit with the Ukrainian regulator about how to introduce European regulatory standards, and if you start to do it, you get yourself aware how unsettled the European rules themselves are, because we don't have the network codes for gas yet; they are still in flux. We have to consult to the Ukrainian side what they should implement. Know what we want to implement ourselves yet, so it's quite a challenging situation. And they want just a blueprint. they come to you telling, what's the European regulation? Give me the text, we want to implement it. And then you say, well, you can do it like the UK, you can do it like Germany or like Slovakia or Malta. Just pick something. Okay, but what's good for us? Well, that's depends. So it's really very technical, very complex, and much more technical assistance for Ukraine would be helpful, especially for the right people, because you have Naftogaz, and in Naftogaz you have a young management team that is quite willing. So Kovalenko is mid-30s or 40s, and he is really wanting to reform Naftogaz. But all the institution of Naftogaz is benefiting from the old situation, and there are certainly people that are linked to outside interests. And in the regulator, it's the same picture. So helping the right people to get the information they need to make the good reforms is maybe as valuable as shipping money there.
We still have something like 10 minutes more questions. Another one from Laguna.
You were touching upon it now. I wanted to, if you can comment a bit more on the likelihood. I saw in your scenario 3 that you assumes a much stronger EU energy policy and coherent policy, realizing the single market for energy union. And that requires also some supranationality. And I know some have suggested that the ACER in Ljubljana, the Agency for Cooperation of Energy Regulators, should become such an overviewer of the market and actually become supranational. And obviously, as you say, it's a lot of technical issues. But I understand also that you said that it's not very likely that we will get such a federal regulator of gas and electricity markets in Europe, or what?
That's a touchy point, because as I said, if you go to the Ukrainian side, want to tell them what they should do, what the European rules are, and at home in Brussels, you're trying to tell the people that the European rules are crap and need to be changed. It's not very consistent. But indeed, the European rules on the gas market and on the electricity market are not up to do the job. Currently, investment decisions in the electricity and gas market are not based on European markets policy. So it's the government that decides it wants a certain transmission line to be built, or the British government that decides that it wants a nuclear power plant, or the Hungarian government that decides it wants to build a certain gas pipeline together with the Russians. And all those investment decisions that are essentially shaping the European electricity and gas sector on the long term, and that are the important drivers for the efficiency of the system, they are not really dealt on a European level. And there, as you say, a more federal approach with a real European regulator would go a long way in helping here. But what is more important, and what I think the energy union debate was about, was really to bring the debate away from national ministries of energy that are very strongly interwoven with their domestic energy industries to the level of heads of government and state, to discuss in Brussels on cow trading between the member states, so that Germany might have something to give in terms of network development and renewables, that Poland might have something to give in terms of climate and coal, and that France might have something to give in terms of its British. So if all this is discussed of government level, it could work. If it's just discussed by the ministers of energy, I don't see that they will find a solution, because each of them is essentially elected to just please their national industries in the short term.
I have also another question, because you have discussed a number of purely economic issues, and also mentioning that this gas sector reform in Ukraine is also can be also very costly in political terms. What is the mood in Kiev nowadays? Do they see this as a huge challenge? Because from a kind of purely political purely political point of view, the situation may develop in the direction of the sitting government being removed due to the fact that they have to design and implement a number of very costly, in political terms, economic and social reforms. How is the situation with the survivability of this sitting government in Kiev in terms of those reforms?
My impression is that the current government, for logical reasons, is very much concerned with the short term. It's looking at the months ahead, and gas sector long-term reforms is maybe not the most prominent on the agenda for its own sake, but it's the IMF money that is interesting. Just to give one example, if you have been in Kiev, you might have heard of this stories about taxation of independent gas producers. In Ukraine, there are still a number of independent gas producers that have to sell gas to Naftogaz now. Has been a new law to help Naftogaz with its debt. So now they cannot sell it for 400 to final consumers anymore, but they have to sell it to Naftogaz at a certain price. And the energy, the gas taxes or the royalties have been increased substantially. So essentially, to extract money from those independent producers. The political argument has been some of those independent producers are linked to some oligarchs that the government doesn't like. But the economic signal is horrible. If you invest here, the next government can come and take away the cream from your and that's not then you're not going to invest there. So my impression is current government still they are in war and they have almost lost everything in economic terms, so they are only looking on the short term, and it's essentially maybe up to the European Union also to help them to keep the focus on the longer term issues, because just short termism is not going to work.
Now you have the last chance to ask the most difficult question. We still have some 5 minutes before we have to end. If there is no questions. Thank you very much for coming all the way from Berlin, and I hope very much that it is only the beginning of a very fruitful cooperation between our institutes. Thank you very much.
Oh.